Well, hello everyone. It has been a while and happy 2023. We are diving into another Civilizations in Review. We're at the end of our full list of empires, but still a few final calls to chat about the very, very different empires that make up the modern Swana region. Today we're with Alfuzaic Fellow for Spring 23, Tanner Willis. As with me as recently always as Ana Campuzano, our fabulous co-moderator in residence, basically chatting about all these ancient empires. As you are seeing this, we are live streaming to Facebook, but we will also cross-post it to our Instagram, our website, our YouTube, and our Spotify. So you can engage with this content everywhere. The thing I will always mention, as I have on every other call, is the best place, though, to go is our website and the article itself. Tanner did a fabulous job writing this article in general, but also with all of the hyperlinks, so you can continue to engage and learn even more about this dynasty that we will not cover over this short call. So with all that said, thank you, Tanner, for this fabulous article. And Anna, I will throw it to you to read the 101 word introduction.
Thank you, Ben, and welcome, Tanner. So this is the Ziyad dynasty. Ziyad in Arabic means growth, which is fitting for the Ziyadid dynasty's enduring influence over modern-day Yemen and throughout the Islamic world for over 1,000 years. Established by Muhammad ibn Ziyad in 820, who was sent to settle a quarrel for the Abbasids, but instead created his own empire and named the capital Zabid after himself. Zabid grew rich in culture, education, and commerce. Nicknamed the Baghdad of Yemen, people traveled well-maintained roads and enjoyed newly erected mosques that connected from Mecca to Aden. The Ziyadid demise eventually came from a revolt of those the empire had enslaved. From all the dynasties and empires that we've studied, I think this is by far the only one that usually came to a demise for this reason. But from what I was reading as well from your 101, it seemed that enslaving people was sort of like a culture or part of like what they were doing in this time. So how did you come about, what did you think about that when you were researching this empire?
I thought it was kind of ironic in the sense of their biggest trade was their demise, which slavery was obviously very common back in those days. But the leader's, I guess, closest slave was the one that ended up taking his life and causing the revolt. That's one thing I thought, yeah, it was very, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of empires have enslavement a part of it, but very few switched hands as a result of those that they've enslaved. That's an interesting component there. Yeah, but I mean, we can start with the end and then work our way backwards, but you talk a bit more about that, how that revolt started, and any other details.
So I know they did a lot of trades with the make sure I'm pronouncing this right, the Habasha and Dalak, which was in modern day Ethiopia area in Africa, and which going across, what's the Red Sea and all that. Just the travel and all that. I'm sure the conditions weren't probably the best, and being traded all around. I mean, not in very good, comfortable situation. You're not going to want to be there very long. And I'm sure they took the opportunity and just wanted a better life because, I mean, that area was fairly new. I mean, the dynasty technically only lasted 200 years. So they probably seen a chance of creating something better for themselves, as we see a lot with people that are oppressed. And just with it being such a cultural and educational and commerce center, just take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think the most ironic part actually was that he was sent to settle and some type of issue, a quarrel, and the Abbasids, which were quite strong in the time, but then eventually that kind of moved into creating his own dynasty, which I think in retrospect, like it's the same thing that sort of happened with the enslaved people. It just continued to kind of developed in this way, which I think it's really quite an interesting thought. But even in this area, even in this time, it looks like they did a lot of work in their 200 years. I mean, considering the modern influence. So what could you tell us about that?
Yes, so their location was very key to that, which, like you said, they set the Muhammad ibn Ziyadid down to solve the quarrel, and he just kind of took advantage of that opportunity. He's like, I'm gonna hold this area, and they actually ended up having a good relationship throughout his dynasty period. I don't know if that was because of previous relations, and they just realized he had that area stable. But you would assume they would be rivals because he did take that power from them. But they had a wadi flowing, which is basically like an irrigation system, which was a huge part of why they were able to, I think, prosper as much because they had agriculture, and it also brought people from farmers and others to trade, and I think that really helped establish their trade routes as well, and the construction of mosque and further, basically, interstate highways for us in the sense of those days.
Fascinating. It's cool to see the, I don't know, things we take for granted of road making and irrigation as unique and new and state of the art back then, and in a lot of ways influences how we do ours today. It was so fascinating. Thank you for sharing those pieces. Yeah, I'm always most fascinated by the modern influence section, because these empires were thousands, hundreds of years ago. This one specifically, almost 1,000 years ago, and so to see that there is still some pretty strong ties from then till now in something as simple as like the roads that were constructed, I think is something really, really fascinating to talk about. I think the other thing that we really can't ignore, especially when it comes to modern Yemen, is the religious influence that the Ziyadid sort of initiated and still continues today. The Zaydi imamate, that sect of Islam or school of Islam, is pretty prevalent in some parts of Yemen still. Please talk about it a bit more, Tanner, but that's something that is also very evident in modern Yemeni life that stemmed from the Ziyadids.
Yeah, that was one thing that really did surprise me because, as I was saying, the dynasty technically only lasted 200 years, but their influence spanned way farther into modern day. Like 30% of Yemenis today kind of associate with the Zadi Eminate. And the closest, I guess you could say, political group would be the Houthi rebels, though they've stated that they don't really want to bring that style of government back. But, that's still, as they are discussing their conflict and with the Yemeni government trying to solve that. But just the fact that it's still, yeah, relevant to their everyday lives, and just the influence it has over the country today.
Yeah, and it's quite common, even most of these empires that we've studied, usually they have this spread of all kind of like commerce as well, which makes me think about the way to diplomacy in these times. Is always just fascinating to think about that. That's what kind of grew relations between countries. And from what I was reading as well, it looks like, there's also like the spread of Islam and bringing mosques and building mosques, it helped as well in the region. Looks like, between Mecca and Oman and all these great mosques being built, I think it really brings the area together as well. It really kind of spread more than many that we've seen, Yemen, and then also having across the Red Sea. It's really a fascinating empire to think about, and to think about the influence that it really does have today. I think about also what you mentioned slightly, if you'd want to talk more about the agriculture and how that played a role in how they kind of maintained themselves for 200 years.
Yes, I say that the wadi flowing that they were able to establish, I think really, was the key to their success. Because if you can't feed your people, the people are going to either move or revolt, or that's just how people are. Everyone's got to eat, and being able to do that, they was able to be settled, comfortable, create those roads. And the mosque, so when people were traveling, they not only were fed, but they felt safe, which made more people be able to have educational centers, and for it to get dubbed the nickname of Baghdad of Yemen. I think without those true infrastructure foundations that, yeah, like Ben was saying earlier, we do take for granted today, but during that time that was unheard of. It was a state of the art city. I think that just really put them a step ahead in per se, compared to others in that area at the time.
Well, that's why we're still talking about them, 800 years later. So
Yeah.
makes perfect sense. Not much more than 800, my goodness. This is really interesting. The connection points that are so present in that city's growth to, not just modern day Yemen, but really how some of our modern cities across the whole globe operate. I think one of the things that is most fascinating is trade. And this ancient Yemeni empire, which is very close to Ethiopia, Eritrea geographically, just it's still need to travel by boat, but it's not a very far distance. However, the fact that they had this really strong trade relationship with these two mighty African empires in modern day Ethiopia and Eritrea, it's so fascinating to me. It obviously Yemen is physically, geographically right next to that part of Africa, and yet two different worlds in how most of geopolitics are thought about. Yemen is an Arab Swana country. Ethiopia and Eritrea are an East African Horn, of Africa countries, right? But yet there was this overlap between these civilizations that is really, really unique. The Habasha and the Dakhla are not going to be an Alpuzek, just because Ethiopia and Eritrea aren't considered Middle Eastern or Southwest Asian in their geography, and yet had a huge influence on this Yemeni empire. So, please share a bit more if you have any more details about, the relationship of these two ancient African empires and the Ziyadid.
See, I know the main things that they traded outside of the slaves was like panther skins and other furs, amber. They had a couple other things I can't think off the top of my head, but I mean, they traded vast different things that you wouldn't have in more desert-like region in Yemen. And then Yemen would trade like just their educational knowledge, their culture, their pottery was really big. So their commerce and their trade was what really, definitely established that relationship. Because like you said, even though they're close, they're still completely different. So they was definitely able to establish a really strong relationship between the two.
I think I'm still like fascinated by the fact that there were so many educational perspectives as well in this empire, mostly because I think education is the foundation for building any kind of city, and this is why I think, as Ben very well put, we're talking about it 1,000 years later, but it kind of held them together as well. It wasn't just about some educational center, but even most of the dynasties or empires that we've studied, they don't really focus on the educational piece, and it makes the people as well kind of respect and be part of the empire, feel like they're part of it. Maybe that's why even 30% of Yemen's population still identified as part of the Zaydi state, because they felt proud and they had this, they were happy. So it's really quite ironic that at the same time that, it made so many people feel, accustomed into this life, there was also slaves and so many enslaved people that eventually were kind of against the dynasty. So it's a weird kind of mix to see, people be content at the same time as not having the same opinion towards Muhammad ibn Ziyad. So I don't know. I'm just thinking about like how was it that it kind of sort of led to that at some point, or why didn't it even start in the first place? Why were people enslaved?
Yeah, so that's one thing I was you would think that with such an educational center, they would have kind of been a step ahead maybe, but maybe they were in a sense. Maybe that's what caused the revolt, is everyone had more of an open mind and realized, hey, this isn't right. We need to do something about this. And we have the mindset and the knowledge to do so. And I think that's also why, even though like we've said it only lasted 200 years, but their influence and ideology has lasted over 1,000 years and still to this day. I mean, it just shows the education is really the foundation of growth, hence the name of Ziyadid. I mean, that's what they've really done, just grown, just their thought process, their education, and their history.
that's such a different perspective to, I don't know, empire building than a lot of these other ones we've talked about. Most of them are like focused on growth in a geographic sense. So more conquering, more enslavement, more building, more of a spread. It doesn't really seem like the Ziyadids cared much about how large their empire was, just that it was, you know, contained and homogenous in some way. Is that true, or am I interpreting this incorrectly?
No, I think that's definitely true. That's one thing I thought was kind of interesting is that they really never fought with anybody, really. I mean, had a couple of feuds, but nothing like that was serious. I couldn't find anything really that said much on it, but
Sure.
it was just, yeah, more from within that happened. And but yeah, they was peaceful, more about just, yeah, creating commerce, education, spreading Islam, and just very, it seemed peaceful, really.
For, for settling a quarrel to kind of establishing an empire. I think they cared more about keeping that together. I think they were more worried about, where they were and what they could do there and how they could grow there and grow within the city, or even make the city relevant for thousands of years. And I mean, for that, definitely they achieved it. But it's something that it seems very off when we sort of think about, as well as empires were worried about growth, as Ben very well put it, kind of like spreading around the region, but also they one other common theme is usually economics, trade, money, richness, that sort of thing. So it's a fascinating thing to think about, that how are their kind of like their political structure, or did they even have such a thing, or what were their politics like, in this time?
Their politics was based off a book of written by it was like, I believe, the grandson of Muhammad ibn Zadid, but Zadid ibn Ali, and he wrote the, I might pronounce this wrong, but Majmu al Fiqh, maybe I think that's how you say it. But they really based their political structure off his teachings, his view of what they call Zadi law or Islamic law. And so they'd have an emir, which is similar to like a monarch, um, uh, a religious leader, and they had to have a kind of a direct descendant of Muhammad, and that they would, but that's just how they kind of did their political structure, and they went from the top down like that. And that was like that, the Zadi state, for until the 1960s, and that's when there was a Republican or Democratic Republic revolution that overthrew it. And but even still to this day, as we've spoken, the Zadi state is still very relevant in today's politics in Yemen.
Was there much kind of like information in your research about how the revolt started, or were there any allies, or I think that maybe you've mentioned that also in modern day Eritrea and Ethiopia, it was kind of like a common thing happening there as well, or was there any detail about that?
There wasn't a whole lot of detail. I think it was just because of such a short time span. They just kind of more or less just said that there was a slave revolt, and that it was
Yeah.
the, I think, grandson or great grandson of Muhammad, that slave that was the one that did the deed and killed him to take over. And after that, it was a lot of political turmoil with different clans throughout the region between the slaves. So it was just kind of back and forth for a couple hundred years after that.
Well, this has been incredibly fascinating. Just hearing the, I don't know, different ways of trade. A lot of these empires are trading north to Europe or eastern to China, India, etc. And yet the Ziyadids are trading technically west, but to Ethiopia and Eritrea. That alone is new, and their emphasis on education rather than geographic expansion is a different one. What a fascinating conversation. Is there any other things in your research, maybe it didn't make to your final article or did, that you'd like to share with us about your knowledge of the Ziyadid Empire dynasty?
I think one thing I found that was really cool is that the Zabid city that was founded is actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That was one thing I found really interesting finding out. That's how much of an impact that this dynasty had. I mean, literally the city that founded it as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Wow, Ben, it looks like we might have to take a trip there. Look at this.
I would love to when it's safe to do so. That would be a wonderful UNESCO hopping trip or something. Maybe AlphaZac will do it in the future one day.
For sure.
If I'm not mistaken, the main image of Ziyadid is from the UNESCO gallery, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yes, yes, it is.
Wow.
Fantastic. Of the historic city of Ziyadid in Yemen.
Amazing.
Fantastic. Any final questions or thoughts you have, Anna, for Tanner about this ancient empire?
No, absolutely not. I want to let the audience read more about it on AlphaZac for sure.
We still didn't talk about. So,
yeah,
that is so interesting. Anything else you'd like to share other than your final thoughts of the Ziyadid Empire, Tanner, as we wrap up today?
I'd say it was definitely a very interesting dynasty. I learned a lot, and there was just their influence, I think, was the biggest thing that was very interesting to me and cool. Definitely, you all have to check it out.
Absolutely.
Wait, one final question that I think we always ask, just so you can tell us, Tanner, was it difficult or like finding research about the Ziyadid, or was there a lot of information, or how did you find it when you were doing your research about it?
Say Google Scholar was a good thing, but there wasn't a whole lot. It was more like a few pages here and there that you could find in different books. So we just kind of had to take a bunch of information and just a few pages here and there and kind of put the story together to say.
So it's a gem, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tanner.
Oh, thank you.
Wow. Well, we'll wrap up there then. Thank you again, Tanner, for this fabulous article. Again, there is more details, hyperlinks, stories, etc. on the AlphaZac website. Just scroll. It is the last one alphabetically, so you got to scroll to the bottom, but it's worth the scroll, I promise, to the Ziyadid dynasty in ancient, early Yemen. About 1,000 years ago. Thank you again, Tanner. What a fabulous article. Thank you, Anna, as always, for your insight, your candor, and your questions. And thank you to our audience for connecting, listening, and exploring more about AlphaZac. We only have about 4 empires left to write about, so if one of them interests you, let's come over to the AlphaZac website, the Join Us team, and we'll plug you in, and you'll be on a future one of these calls. Maybe Anna or Tanner is your co-moderator. And with that, we will stop this conversation. Thank you again, Tanner and Anna, for your time, your insight, and this article. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks again.